Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. There's quite a long war that's going on in Israel. And of course, we're going to discuss that again today. Joe Truzman, my friend and colleague at FDD, who is also a research analyst for FDD's Long War Journal, will join us. And we also have a guest today, David May. He's the research manager and a senior research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and is very well versed on all issues related to Israel and the Palestinians. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And Joe, welcome back as always. You might have just achieved a co-host status. So you are, at some point you're part of the podcast. So we got a lot to discuss today. Before we get into it, one of the things we want to talk about today is the bigger picture. How is Israel being pressured internationally? How are foreign countries looking at this issue and some other things that we'll discuss. But before we do, as we do always, Joe, give us a real brief update on the tactical situation in Israel's ground invasion in Gaza, what's going on up at the north, and any other interesting developments.
Right. So what we're seeing is pretty much what we've been seeing the last few days, right? Or last few weeks. Israel continues to move south. I think right now the objective, it's been Gaza City, especially the Shifa Hospital, which is reported and well known to be a Hamas command center, specifically underneath the hospital. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Shifa, Gaza City, in the next few days as Israel continues to dismantle Hamas in Gaza. So just a quick update, at least in the past few days, about what's happening. Earlier this morning, earlier this morning, rather, the IDF published a statement saying that they eliminated a anti-tank anti-tank missile commander belonging to Hamas. He's just one of many commanders that have been eliminated. All right. He's not like a top guy like Sinwar or Dave. But I mean, he's still a piece of the puzzle, right? In the military hierarchy of Hamas. So he's just somebody, he's important enough to mention. I'll just say that. So, which is always a good thing for the IDF and the Israeli security agency. But so anyway, so that's one thing.
Joe, before you go on with that, I'm going to just make a quick comment about that. People for years have been asking me, well, what should I read about, going after terrorist organizations? And the book by Mark Bowden, I forget the name of the book, but it's the one where killing Pablo Escobar. And he talks about this. Part of the strategy for the U.S. and the Colombians was to go after those middle managers, which you could call them, right? These were in the case of Escobar, it was his sicarios and others, that got finance guys. They're the key part. You want to isolate that senior leadership. You got to go after that middle management. So that's what the Israelis are doing. It's very clear. It's something, it's a lot of work. And the book is, thanks, David. It is Killing Pablo, The Hunt for the World's Greatest Outlaw. I highly recommend that if you want to understand the, fighting against terrorist organizations. It's not very intuitive, but it makes a lot of sense once you read the book. And it's a good read as well. Go on, Joe.
Yeah. I'll be as quick as possible here. In the northern front, Hezbollah continues to launch attacks. Again, they're just below really the threshold of an all-out conflict. So they're mostly concentrating on Israeli military positions. Civilian did die, I think it was yesterday, in one of the attacks. So one of the Hezbollah attacks in northern Israel. So that's noteworthy to mention. Also, this morning, we don't know for sure yet because the IDF hasn't said, but there was a drone I don't know if you want to describe it as an attack, but a drone exploded on a school in southern Israel in Eilat. It's like a Red Sea resort. It's a city right there in the Red Sea. So, and we know that the Houthis have been attempting to attack Eilat on several occasions. So, but this may be a Houthi attack. We don't know yet. At this moment, the IDF hasn't said it was a Houthi attack, nor has the Houthis published a statement today saying that they successfully attacked Eilat. So that's something to note. And lastly, a little bit of activity in the West Bank today, specifically in Jenin. I think the last time I saw about at least a statement from Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. 5 of their members have been killed by IDF troops in Jenin. I don't know the details of why the IDF was in Jenin. Probably just the usual anti-terrorism raids. Of course, we know Jenin is a hotbed of terrorist activity. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, and other armed groups operate heavily there. So it's not a surprise that there's a lot of fighting there. So at least 5 members have been killed. So that's it for now. Just quickly as well, I don't see this as like another front opening up in the West Bank. All right. As far as the West Bank is concerned, post October 7th, as of now, I don't see a huge jump in activity of terrorist organizations. So, which is good news, right? Because right now Israel's just managing the fronts. It's managing Hezbollah. It's managing the Houthis. It's managing the West Bank. It's managing Syria. So it's focused on Gaza right now. So far, so good with at least that front.
Yeah, excellent point, Joe. That the Israelis really are concerned about this ballooning past Gaza. I think they've done a pretty good job of it. It's got to be frustrating with Hezbollah, particularly and other groups launching attacks from the north. But, it's definitely to Israel's advantage at this point in time and keeping the bulk of the fighting confined to Gaza. So David, I'm going to turn to you now. Give us your impressions 1 month in with how is the international community reacting to this? Is Israel beginning to be, or should I say, are countries like the U.S. and European countries beginning to, because they're the ones that really count here, beginning to constrain Israel in its ability to wage war in Gaza?
So first off, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. And just wanted to just add a note on Eilat that it's Israel's Vegas. So whatever happens there stays there. So too with drone attacks.
Yep.
But so we're just over 1 month in after the Hamas attacks of October 7th. And Israel is really fighting 2 wars here. It's fighting one on the ground, military campaign against Hamas, trying to evict them from the territory. And it plays into the second war that they're fighting, which is the public relations battle to give it the time and space that it needs to operate. Whenever Israel is attacked, it has a window of opportunity, however long the United States and Europe and other international partners wait until they put a lot of pressure on Israel to constrain itself. So that's why we've been in this situation since 2006, 2007, that every few years a new battle erupts because the war is never finished. It's just different battles and iterations of the same war. So we've been seeing this at the beginning. The United States really gave Israel a lot of time and space, and this is just something so unparalleled in Israel's history, and it's also just in terms of egregious acts of egregious atrocities, something that the world has barely ever seen. So Israel got more time and space this time, but a few weeks in, the calls for a ceasefire, or if you want to make it sound a little more palatable, then you would call it a humanitarian pause. There's some distinctions, but not many. And the fear is that if humanitarian pause turns into a ceasefire, then Israel will not be able to achieve its objectives and it will leave Hamas there on its border as a viable threat. And so this is not just a far-flung terrorist group thousands of miles overseas. This is a group that's kilometers away from Israeli civilian centers. And we saw on October 7th what happens when they're allowed to roam free. So on the American front, the pressure is starting to become a little more pronounced against Israel. But actually just today or yesterday, actually, the deputy prime minister of Belgium has called for sanctions against Israel, which is a pretty drastic step. especially because Israel's prosecuting its battle against Hamas. And this kind of ties into the kinetic warfare versus the public relations space. Hamas is doing everything possible to ensure additional civilian casualties, both on the Israeli side, but also on the Palestinian side. And so when Israel attacks Hamas fighters, and unfortunately there's civilian casualties along the way, Israel gets blamed rather than Hamas for putting its fighters and its weapons in civilian areas. And so when the international community is putting this pressure on Israel to halt its fight prematurely against Hamas, they're playing into Hamas's strategy of not allowing Israel to achieve its objectives.
I was going to say, I said this from the beginning, it's just sort of like David saying, but Israel, one of the biggest problems it's going to have is time, right? Just looking at previous conflicts, talk about 2021, for example, 2014, and all the other conflicts in between, right? International pressure starts to grow after a few days, start seeing pressure from allies of Israel, and we start seeing protests, especially in 2014. I remember in 2014, there was protests, in the United States and in other countries during that conflict between Hamas and Israel. And I fully expected that to happen this year in this round, but this one's completely different, right? I mean, this is a war. I mean, Israel has declared war, so it's on a much grander scale, I think. So yeah, I think now the pressure is on Israel. Now, are they willing to buckle, right? Are they willing to, take the hits, not only just, on the battlefield, but on the international stage, and because they have to achieve their goal here, right? At least in the eyes of the Israeli government, they have to eliminate Hamas. This is what they've been saying from the beginning. They have to get rid of them. So, again, I don't know if they're going to be able to, just because of all these things, right? Of the international pressure and what's happening on the ground. So we'll see. But yeah, time is definitely not on the Israel side. That's for sure.
That clock just begins ticking almost immediately. It took less than a week for the perception to turn against Israel after this attack. As soon as it began operations in Gaza, launching airstrikes against terrorists and terrorist infrastructure against Hamas and other groups. And typically that clock has been about 1 to 2 months in previous conflicts. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Israel weathers this storm, because as we've noted, and David, as you said, there's internally, I don't know that the Israelis can allow Hamas, to stand, or allow whatever, even if it isn't Hamas, the next iteration of Hamas to rise from the ashes in Gaza. Now, I'm going to turn to a statement that Secretary of State Antony Blinken made. This was in the Washington Post yesterday. It says, "No use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism or other violent attacks. No reoccupation of Gaza after the conflict ends. No attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza." These are very contradictory statements. Would you agree with that, David? How are you going to prevent Gaza from being used as a platform for terrorism if at least at some point in time there isn't an occupation of Gaza, even if it's for a year or 2 years, to stand up whatever is going to replace the governance in Gaza?
So I think it's very easy to establish what people are opposed to, what we shouldn't do. But when it comes to solutions for how Israel should protect its citizens, that's a lot more difficult to clarify a position. We saw when Israel withdrew from the territory completely in 2005, it was seen as a peace gesture to the Palestinians. And obviously that is not what Israel received in return. And then even on the right wing side of Israel, sometimes there was a thought that, it was actually a pretty brilliant play if you give them Gaza, but then maybe they'll take more of the West Bank. In negotiations, they'll have all of Gaza, and let's see what they do with it. And they turned it into this bastion of terrorism. So why is Israel going to allow that to exist within kilometers of its capital in Jerusalem? So we've definitely seen that part of it play out. I don't know how you keep Gaza, how you keep residents of Israel, not only within the envelope surrounding Gaza, but anywhere within rocket range, or if they're able to break into Israel again. I don't know how you keep Israelis safe without getting in there. I think you've written about the danger of having a safe haven for terrorists. And if you allow a safe haven for terrorists to exist on Israel's border, it spells doom, not just in Israel, across the globe, wherever you allow that to happen. So there has to be some type of some power that goes in. Obviously, Hamas is not an option. The Palestinian Authority doesn't want to have anything to do with the territory, and there's also a lack of legitimacy among Palestinians. They don't believe the Palestinian Authority to be capable or a legitimate representation of their aspirations. Israel won't be welcome there for sure. So I just don't know who is supposed to keep the peace there, but just allowing it to be a Wild West again is not an option.
Yeah, and I've heard talk of an international peacekeeping force being deployed into Gaza. I think this has been kicked around. I mean, who exactly would do that? And boy, I got to tell you, if the Qataris are involved in discussions on this, hold on to your wallet. I can just tell you from Afghanistan, with getting the Qataris involved with negotiations with the Taliban, that isn't going to go well. But is that even a viable option, David? An international peacekeeping force? Would the Israelis accept it? Who would they accept?
So if we're going to kind of draw on a parallel situation, we might point to Lebanon and UNIFIL. It's the United Nations force for Lebanon that's supposed to keep the peace and prevent that Hezbollah is not operating along Israel's border on the north. And unfortunately, to say the least, they haven't lived up to their mandate, and they've allowed.
That's quite the understatement, David. But yes,
I leave it to you guys to describe exactly how they failed. But needless to say, they've been on the border. They've allowed Hezbollah to build infrastructure along the border to store weapons throughout there. They don't really hinder Hezbollah's operations in the least bit. And so if that's what we can expect from an international peacekeeping force, the one that we have along Israel's northern border, I'm not sure how much better we should expect anything to come out of Gaza.
You can't just leave a vacuum there, right? You just can't get rid of Hamas and then what? Then another armed group takes over? Like, it just doesn't work like that. So, and honestly, I don't think there are many countries that want to get themselves involved in this Israel-Palestinian conflict, right? Like, yeah. So it's a very good question. I don't think anyone has the answers to it. I'm not sure the Israelis have the answer to it right now. But so yeah, I just don't know how this is going to work without some type of force being in Gaza on the ground and having some sort of operating there just to make sure so armed groups don't pop up and and all sorts of other things that have to do with the situation. So yeah, it's complicated for sure, to say the least.
Yeah, and there's two issues here, right? Who's willing to do it? And then who would the Israelis trust to do it? Well, maybe three. Who would the Palestinians trust to do it? It seems the only country that the Israelis would trust to do it would be the U.S. And I don't think the U.S. is willing to put you would need a significant amount of troops, 2 million people, 140 square miles. The reality is Israel, the IDF isn't going to get every terrorist, and there's going to be a pop-up. I just can't of some armed activity there post the Hamas defeat. I just can't see this administration doing it. The Palestinians certainly would be hostile to the U.S., in my opinion, given what we've seen in the from protests and rhetoric coming out from Gaza and from the West Bank and from Palestinian leaders. And again, it's just this one baffles me. I mean, the day after the defeat of Hamas is probably the biggest problem in this entire conflict. I mean, aside from the humanitarian problems within Gaza right now, and the Israelis, the sacrifice they're making to clear Gaza, Hamas and other terrorist groups from Gaza.
Right. It's I don't know. A bunch of I don't knows is basically what we're getting right now. And so yeah, I hate saying it. I don't know.
Listen, one of the things I find in Washington is a lot of people pretend they have the answers when they really don't. It's one of the most frustrating things that I've experienced. And for us to say we don't know, we have to ask these questions in order to try to find solutions. And if we, saying we don't know at this moment is, that's part of the solution. It's the beginning to a solution, at least at this point.
Along those lines, until we do know, until we do have a good solution, I don't think that we should rule out options that could work. And so if we're too swift to rule out Israeli forces securing the area for a certain period of time, without any alternative, we don't have any good alternatives. So we just have to work with the solutions that we might have.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at here in this conversation. It's the really the logical answer here is that the Israelis have to occupy Gaza for some period of time. I mean, I guess the hope is that the Palestinians will, after this operation is over, that hopefully they'll be convinced that Hamas isn't in their future, that fighting the Israelis consistently isn't in their future. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in the Israeli jargon, there's the idea that you throw a grenade into the mix and it just shuffles things up. It may be a little too, jarring of a term here, but the basic idea is before the war happened, Israeli society was in a different place, both among Jews, but also within Jews and Arabs in Israel. The dynamics were very different than what they are now. And so too, among the Palestinians, things could change when they see just how devastating Hamas has been for the Palestinians and that the Palestinians need a new direction. It should, I would hope, give people more inspiration to go towards a more peaceful route. That might not be the case, but it also gives the opportunity to show that if Hamas was so much of a failure in its attempts to lead the Palestinian people by attacking Israel, perhaps the more peaceful route that's mostly espoused by the Palestinian Authority can be a more beneficial option for the Palestinians. So this could be the perfect opportunity once you weaken Hamas to the point where it's no longer such a threat to the Palestinian Authority for them to step up. They now have an opportunity and their leaders should step up. Unfortunately, as we've pointed to, the fact that Mahmoud Abbas is now in year, I believe, in year 19 of a 5-year term. He has no internal legitimacy. He also pushes aside any potential threats or successors, meaning that there's not as many capable leaders within the Palestinian Authority. So this would be the opportunity for them to step up into this vacuum and to push the Palestinians towards statehood and towards improving their economic situation. Unfortunately, I don't know that will be the case, just given the dynamics among Palestinians.
Yeah, and you touched upon, and let's explore this a little further. The internal politics within Israel, the reaction to the Israeli people before this attack. I know this, having visited Israel twice. There is a diverse range of opinions on how to deal with the Palestinian problem within the Israeli public. Have they essentially united on this issue? Is there still conflict, and what conflicts exist within Israel over this issue?
In terms of an end game, I don't think there's no unity. There's no clear cohesion in terms of the Israeli consensus on that. But in terms of viewing the threats coming from Gaza and from Hamas, that across the board it was a wake up call for a lot of people on the left who saw them, and not even just on the left, even on the right, they saw Hamas as a moderate force that they could work with compared to some other groups that are less extremist. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the game in Gaza. But there was the idea that they were a power that you could work with, and that just given the facts on the ground, what happened on October 7th, not just the scale, which is the biggest attack on Israel ever, also the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And I would also just note that we're currently recording this on the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the beginning of the not the beginning, but one of the big points in Nazi Germany in terms of attacking Jews, something that we've sadly seen worldwide as a reaction to Hamas's attacks. But anyways, on the Israeli domestic front, everyone knew how terrible this was in terms of the scope, but then the details that we've seen come out in terms of the savagery, beheadings, rape, just absolutely terrible things. And people who may have not wanted to believe that this was Hamas's how they operate. This is just how they are. This is how they operate. This is what Hamas will do if they're given the time and space to do that. And so there's a pretty overwhelming consensus within Israel that Hamas cannot continue to operate. They cannot continue to pose that threat. It's not just a deterrence issue. We can't just deter them from acting. We have to completely disable them.
And is this a perception or a view that exists within the Israeli Arabs? There's a significant portion of Israelis are Arabs. I believe it's around 2 to 3 million. Is that correct?
Somewhere in that range. It's somewhere to 20 to 25% of Israel's 9 million citizens. So for the most part, the reaction day of and in the wake of it has just been a unification between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. There were dozens of Israeli Arabs, Muslims who were killed by Hamas when they pleaded for their lives, saying that they were Arab or that they were Muslim. Hamas just saw them as, collaborators and people working with the Jews. And even though they were Arabs and they shared a lot of, ethnic and cultural ties, for them it didn't really matter, and also at that point they didn't really care who they were killing. They were killing anyone that they saw, and so they killed dozens of foreign workers, and they are currently holding over 50 Thai citizens captive as well. So it's really more of a battle between just people who believe in death and people who believe in life. And so on the Israeli Arab side, we saw a lot of cooperation. There were just great heroic stories of Israeli Arabs coming to rescue their relatives, but also coming to rescue anyone along the way that they were able to rescue. Also, just Israeli Arabs, especially the Bedouin, are featured prominently in Israel's military. So there were a lot of stories about their exploits on the day of and since then in terms of defending the state of Israel. But also, as I mentioned before, there's a time to reevaluate. So right before October 7th, we were in a situation where the Israeli Arabs were facing the worst internal violence in their history. There were over 200 Israeli Arabs killed since January 1st. Many of them felt like they were abandoned by the state of Israel. But we saw the dedication of Israeli Arabs to defending the state of Israel. And I guess my hope would be that the Israeli government reciprocates that dedication.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, and on our final topic, there has been reports that Palestinian journalists actually embedded themselves on October 7th, crossed the border with Hamas, and took photographs and videos. And some of these journalists purportedly work for major news or wire services, Reuters, AP, CNN. Tell us a little bit about that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So there was a report yesterday, I think is by Honest Reporting. I think they first broke it. So that there are reporters based in Gaza that basically went along with Hamas fighters and members of other groups into the communities rather. In Israel on October 7th. They were there with them. They were taking photos. They were taking pictures, videos, all that. And it's true. They did, because I saw it that night. I was watching everything, and I came across that. Some of these reporters are for Gaza observers, are well known. There's one, Hassan Aslich, and there's a few others. Anyway, so the accusation is that that somehow these news organizations colluded with these reporters, and that they somehow, these Gaza-based journalists, and that these organizations knew about the attack, right? So, and it raises other ethical issues as well, of course. So, which is another story. But so we just got to be careful, because I don't know about the exact links with these organizations, with these news media groups, like with the New York Times, for example, or Reuters, or whoever. I don't know how strong those links are between the Gaza-based journalists and the organization, right? I don't know about that. I can't comment about that. So, but I can say that these journalists were there. They were filming. They were inside Israel. Which is concerning. Also, some years ago, in 2018, there was this thing called the Gaza March of Return, and it was basically rioting along the security fence between Gaza and Israel, and a lot of these armed groups were taking part in it. Okay, they were planting IEDs, they were infiltrating into Israel, doing all sorts of things. Anyways, so one of the journalists, so-called journalists, he would follow these armed groups and film them doing activities, okay? Whether it was launching balloons, incendiary-laden balloons into Israel in an attempt to scorch farmland or infiltrate into Israeli territory. This guy would always follow them, right? He'd publish video. And then anyways, he ended up, after doing some research on him, after I did some research on him, ended up being a member of Hamas's police as well. So, which is kind of interesting to me. So anyway, I think some of these journalists there's a possibility that they're connected to Hamas. I mean, like I mentioned, Hassan Aslich, there's a photo of him receiving a nice kiss from Yahya Sinwar. So Hamas is a leader in Gaza. So it's just interesting. So there appears to be links there, and this is concerning. It's a real ethical. You could just say something's not right there, right? When I first saw those videos of these journalists inside Israel, I was like, something's definitely not right here. So we'll see. I don't know about the links, to be quite honest with you, but that's the gist of the story right now.
And were they identifying themselves as journalists? Were they wearing like a vest or helmet with press, which you normally see?
I know with two of them, I don't recall seeing them wearing press, right? Even though they're maybe recognized as press to people that obviously know them, right? I don't recall them wearing anything that shows that they're press, but you could see them. I mean, they were reporting from there. It just depends how you want to see it, right? When you view it, or they're actually reporting, or are they doing something else? But they were. So I know with two of them. I don't know with the others. So I don't know. This one's an interesting story. I'll say that. That's for sure.
David, any thoughts?
Yeah, so one thing is that this is not particular to Gaza, but wherever you are a journalist, you work with locals on the ground to get the best stories. And so that will, for one way or another, that will shape the reporting that is done, is how the the local journalists shape the New York Times or Reuters or whatever outlet is reporting. The other thing to note is that, Hamas controls this territory, controls it with an iron fist, and it really is obsessed with the messaging that comes out of this territory. So in the 2014 war, there was a tweet by a Wall Street Journal reporter, Nick Casey, talking about Shifa Hospital and he said, I wonder how the Palestinians here would feel about the fact that Hamas is using it as a headquarters. That tweet was quickly deleted because it did not go along with Hamas's preferred narrative. There's also a lot of other examples of journalists reporting something that would have been negative about Hamas and then retracting it, deleting it. There's strict orders, as far as I understand, on journalists not to film Hamas operatives, not to film them launching rockets, which is very often done from within residential areas. Hamas will say that that's, it's a tactical thing. You don't want to give up our positions. And so that would be dangerous. But also it would be very damaging to their PR strategy because they are using human shields and they're firing from within civilian areas. So this the most recent the most recent event in terms of reporters embedding themselves and going across the border, it points to the general issue about reporting coming out of Gaza and how much it falls in line with Hamas's preferred narrative. One other thing, not necessarily journalists, but there's UNRWA, the Palestinian Refugee Agency. They put out a tweet talking about how people reporting to be from the Ministry of I'm trying to remember which, but from the government running Gaza, which is Hamas. They came and they took fuel and medical supplies from an UNRWA facility. And so they complained about that. That would have been very damaging to Hamas. And very soon after, that tweet was deleted and UNRWA issued something else instead. So just all the information that does come out of Gaza is coming out under Hamas's control. And so that's this most recent episode is just a pretty good reminder of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We started mentioning, David, you led in with and I'm glad you did. It's not just a physical war, but it's an information war. And, it's a war that is really stacked against the Israelis. Joe and I discussed this in a previous episode, and we touched on that again today. It really is frustrating that the UN and the journalists, even though they know what's happening, they sort of continue to play the game in order to ensure their access within Gaza. And it would be nice to see some honesty from these groups for once, but I guess we can't expect it.
Yeah, so before I was talking about how everyone knows what we don't want. We don't want civilian casualties, obviously, but we have to factor in the fact that Hamas is using human shields. What options does Israel have to protect its own civilians without, unfortunately, killing Palestinian civilians along the way? I mean, this is war. It's not pretty, and it's very unfortunate. It's tragic how many Palestinians are dying. But when we don't ascribe the blame to its proper place, all it does is encourages Hamas to use human shields in the future. It's a winning strategy. The world is obliging Hamas in this. And so all it will do is encourage Hamas to do it in the future.
Absolutely. Well said, David. David, thank you for joining us. Joe, thank you for joining us for today's episode of Generation Jihad. I hope to get you back on soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks again. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. Just a reminder, you could find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.